and I will hand it over to Bracken.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bracken Mossbacker, the Technical Standards Architect for LTI and some of the other standards here at One EdTech. Thanks for coming to the roundtable. Today, we're going to be talking about the names and roles provisioning service. No one actually calls it NERPS, except for those that do. I don't recommend it. The other nickname that I might say when I don't mean to is the roster service. But that is incorrect. So names and roles is the way we're to say it. So we're going to talk about that today. And what we've been talking about with all of these, this is the last one in our series of diving deeper into the LTI Advantage services. So we're going to do the same thing we've been doing that we did with deep linking and assignments and grades. And so I'm going to talk at you for a little while. Some details, work group members and others will pipe in as I go, as they have nuances and as I say things that are incorrect. So when people pipe in, listen to them as well. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go, and we should have plenty of time at the end for questions as well. So let's get going. So names and roles. I just gave this context, but again, LTI Advantage is a group of multiple specifications, and we have now dived deep into each of these in roundtables. And today we're covering names and roles as the last one, just to give a little context there again. So names and roles is for getting the names and roles of users in an LTI platform. And I find a good way to understand this is often to compare it to LTI 1.1, because lots of people are familiar with how this works in LTI 1.1. And here's how it works. You have a platform, an LMS, a portal, or whatever it is, and it has a bunch of users. And then you have an LTI tool that's integrated into that platform where you want to send your learners to learn. And this tool wants to know some information about the user and wants that user to be logged in and signed in. And so the common pattern that is from LTI, old LTI, but also this applies just as much to LTI Advantage and should be seen as the default user route, is a user clicks on an LTI link, comes over to the tool, and it says, hey, I'm a student in this course, and here's all this information about me. And the tool's like, oh, cool, look, we have a user. And the tool's happy, it has all the information it needs, and it might only know about that one user, but it has enough information to give an experience to that user. And then as all the other users that exist in that course come in, the tool can start to build up a roster of users it's seen. So I think that the main thing to understand with this pattern of getting users is a tool can only see the users who have actually clicked an LTI link to access that tool from the platform. If a user has not clicked a link, has not accessed it, the tool doesn't know they exist, and the tool can't send grades for them and things like that, the other various LTI stuff. So this is a super flexible and robust pattern for most LTI tools. And again, I still recommend this as the primary way LTI tools should think about getting the rosters, just saying, hey, a user might be coming in and I've probably never heard of them and I might not know who all the peers are, but I can still, plan for a world where I'm getting new users as the launch happens. And that is quite scalable. But there are many use cases where people do want to know all the users in a course, or used before they come in. There are various scenarios there, and that's where names and roles comes in. It allows that possibility to happen. So what that looks like is you have a tool, and now that we have an API service for fetching the roster, the names and roles of the users in the course, a tool can simply say, hey, what are the memberships you have? And the platform will return a paginated result set of all of the users enrolled in that course. So now a tool can have a full accounting of the members of that course. And it also has some other, we'll dive into these, some other useful things like, say a platform adds a user and a tool wants to make sure to be able to know those. A tool, can say, hey, is there anything new since yesterday? So there's some syncing options there It could tell you if someone was deleted or added, things like that. So how does this work? So this is just another LTI service. So it has some data models defined, and you access it via the same API mechanics that we do with any of the LTI services. So what's returned is called the membership container, and there's two primary return formats for names and roles provisioning service. The primary one that you usually would care about is this membership container. I think there's two, right? Yeah. I was thinking about the groups one too. So this is what it looks like. Say you're a tool and you say, give me all your memberships. The platform will send something back like this. And this represents the minimal amount of data, almost the minimal amount of data that is required by the specification. The only things that are required are the ID of the context and the status and user ID of each of the membership records. I believe the roles aren't even required. Maybe they are, but I put them in there anyway.
The role object is required, but the array could be empty.
There we go. Perfect. So this represents the only required fields. And so just as I was saying with LTI launches, you might get a user and need to be able to deal with a brand new user on an LTI launch. As a tool, even if you say want all the other data that exists for a user, this might be all you get. And it's very important as a tool to recognize how to effectively run on the minimal set of data for these services. Now, you may require extra fields and work with your platform to get that data and ensure that you have it. But your tool will be much more flexible and dynamic if you do not require all those fields. And so this is just another good example of the minimal fields. The status, it says in the docs, you assume active if there is no status explicitly in the object. So it says assume active. So this is an example of some of the data that can come. So these are the minimal required fields. This is, example of the data. And really what this is meant to represent is the same information you would get about a user on an LTI launch will come across via the membership service. On an LTI launch, the name of all the things are specified by OIDC. So we might not always have the exact same field names for all of those, just to make that clear. But the common things are, names and other various IDs that could come with the user. And so the intent is that if you as a tool fetch all your memberships from the membership service instead of individual LTI launches, you should still be able to build the same picture of each of those users as you do as if each of them had launched in manually. But this is, it's fairly simple JSON objects here of all the properties. There is a names and roles defines a filter for individual resource links. Now, I don't believe all the platforms or most of the platforms have implemented this, so I won't dive into this too deeply. But what we do is on the membership URL that you get, you can add RLID. That means resource link ID. That would be the resource link ID for an individual LTI resource link. And so what this is saying is, hey, give me all of the users who have access essentially to this specific LTI link. And then you get back a membership container that looks exactly like the one we already looked at, but it might now have this field called message. And this is meant to hold all of the extra LTI launch information that would be provided by clicking that link. So different links can have different custom parameters, things like that. And so this allows you, hey, maybe I've got a special link with some custom parameters to launch a specific tool and I need some extra data. This would allow you to fetch that for all of your users for that link. But again, I don't think this is super broadly implemented, but there's some interesting use case potential there. So if anyone does utilize this, let me know. I'm happy to give it as a good example. There we go. Okay. So let's talk about what data to expect. And workgroup people, feel free to hop in with nuances here. I kind of already said a lot of this on those other slides. You know, the best practice for a tool is to rely only on required fields and make sure that you've got quality fallback behaviors in your systems and in your user interface for the users when you don't get things like their name or their email address, things like that. So you need to plan for that. The data, just like the launch messages, is often configurable on the platform. So say you integrate into the same LMS with 2 different customers, you might get more data from one customer than you do from the other because they have configured your registration, your integration to only send specific data. And so that's another, you know, kind of note to take as tools. You can't expect the exact same stuff from every single client or customer because it's often a configuration option in the platforms. Also, this is not meant as a full, like, we'll talk more about SIS and full rostering, but a platform might not actually return all of the users in a course, for example. The platform might have features for users to opt out of an integration. And in that case, the platform might not send that user because that user wouldn't ever click an LTI link to get there. The platform might also not send that user in the membership records, in the names and roles records. So that's another thing to take note of. And then a current issue that we're trying to, as a community, figure out the best route forward with is right now, the data we receive, you know, is kind of all the normal LTI launch information. The spec gives a way to add in the custom parameters and other LTI launch information. This one is for a specific link stuff, but if a registration is configured to have a bunch of user or person variables, we think they can and should be returned in a membership call for that user as well. And that's in the spec. No one has implemented that, and there's a lot of people in the community saying right now it's a hot topic, saying, hey, let's start getting people to implement this and get some best practices around this to be a little bit more clear. So if there are use cases from folks here who aren't active in the work group, feel free to share those and talk about that, and let us know if that's something you would like to try to get platforms providing as well, if that makes sense. Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add. It was kind of touched on earlier, but just to clarify, for names and roles, you are fetching just the members of a single context. So the URL that you're given is just for that one context. It's not for an entire roster of every user in a system. So yeah, sort of talking about the data that we're getting, you're getting scoped data.
Great. So the mechanics for LTI APIs are that when you do an LTI launch, you have this launch claim in there. And the launch claim for names and roles looks just like this. And as Martin was saying, you will get a membership URL that is intended to be specifically for the context you're doing that LTI launch from. I'm just restating what Martin said here. And so, you as an LTI tool with names and roles can't expect to be able to get a launch from a teacher in one course and then query a dozen other courses to get the roles, the memberships of those. This is LTI is kind of small context focused versus the whole all of the courses at a school, and so that is definitely important to take note that these URLs are context specific. And so another thing of note for this launch claim is that most of the launch claims, and we'll see another one later, include a key that has the scope you must request for this launch claim. But names and roles, most platforms do not include that scope just because there's only one, and we decided to not when we first defined this. So you as an implementer of this cannot rely on that scope being inside the launch claim like you can on all the other services. And if we have a bunch of other internet nerds here, this makes me think of the popular Schitt's Creek meme going around where you just have to know how to fold something into your bread dough. And the joke at the end is you just have to know. Well, unfortunately, I don't know how. So this is just something you have to know when you're implementing names and roles is you got to hard code that scope for yourself. So a couple other interesting features. These results are all paginated, and the way the pagination works is when you get your response, you will get a link header. And if you're not familiar with the link header, this is a header that can return a bunch of links. It's meant to be a convenience for API consumers so they don't have to construct their own URLs, and so that platforms can have different URL patterns and things like that. And so as a tool, you should always check your link headers and see if there's one that says rel next, and that means there is a next page, and then use that URL. The patterns of pagination and things like that are not defined by names and roles itself. So these are very platform specific, and you may not be able to manipulate these. Sometimes it'll just be a specific record ID or something like that. So it kind of depends. So this is meant to be opaque to the tool. Just there's a next URL, you grab it and use it. And if there is no next URL, there's no next page.
Authentication and everything else like that is the same for any subsequent URLs that you're calling.
Yes, you're still throwing your token in that accept header in the end. Yeah. There's some filters you can put on those query strings. One is you could filter to just the learners, for example. The vocabulary for this is exactly the same as the LTI roles vocabulary, which is convenient, but you have to make sure you properly escape those fully qualified role names that you normally see. You can also recommend to the tool, to the platform, how many memberships to include in each of the results. So maybe you've got 1,000 people course, and you only want to paginate in groups of 10 or something like that. But that again is a recommendation to the platform, because the platform may ignore that limit in that particular case. And then one other thing that could appear in the link header, a platform may support the differences endpoint. I mentioned that already once. And you'll see, again, it's a link header, and you'll see the rel differences over there. And what this is meant to do is when you make this request, this URL will be should be, or the intent is that this URL will give you all the differences from the moment you made this call right now. So if you make this call on Tuesday, you get a URL and you make the call on Thursday, it'll be between Tuesday and Thursday. But if you make that second call on Sunday, it'll be between Tuesday and Sunday. And so just kind of take notes, since the pattern here is, hey, I make a membership call, I can cache this differences URL, and next time I go to make another call to check if there's any changes, I use this, I get back a new response, and I get back a new differences URL, and I save that for the next time. And so instead of having to get many paginated responses to check for things, this is a pattern that can be really useful. And then the status in a normal in a non-differences response of the membership service, you will only see the status of active or inactive. It's only the current state. If you're getting a differences one, you may see record with the deleted value of status. You should only see that in a differences response. Cool. Oh, I don't know. So we're going to go on now. That's kind of the basics of names and roles and some of the use cases. A very common question here, and I didn't dive as deep into this as I really wanted, but we often hear, how is this different than an SIS integration, than one roster, and all those things. And so I'll talk about that just a little bit. First of all, there's a bunch of different patterns of how these tools work together within the one EdTech ecosystem. And you often have to kind of take a step back when you're dealing with multiple and think about the systems involved and the problems they're trying to solve. When we talk LTI, we often think of LTI as being very LMS centric. This kind of picture here on the left, where all launches go through the LMS, all the grades go back to the LMS from LTI tools, and LTI was kind of built with that as the primary use case, though not the only one. And so you kind of have to remember, as we're talking about these, not everything is LMS centric. But when it is LMS centric, here's kind of the pattern of how this works. The LMS usually is provisioning itself from an SIS system, and that gets all of the official courses and enrollments and things like that. And it integrates in there, maybe the grades of record go back there and stuff like that. But then within the LMS, you can often add new users and courses that aren't part of the SIS system, for example. And then an application that integrates into an LMS, an LTI tool. The LMS kind of does a single sign-on over to the tool, and then it can fetch the names and roles from the LMS. And those might be different records than they would get from the SIS for that same course. They'll often be the same, they might be different, or an SIS might not even be involved at all in that context. So that's a common pattern. And then the other one is kind of, I'm calling it the portal pattern, but this can happen with any LTI platform, including LMSs. But it is kind of more common in portals, particularly in K-12, and that looks like kind of a single sign-on portal. This is what my kids use this. They go to one place and they click and they end up over on some math tool, and the portal wasn't providing a grade book and things like that. It really is just a single sign-on mechanism, part of LTI. And when those apps need to have more information about the users or send grades back or deal with those things, they often work with the SIS more directly using OneRoster, for example. And so it is quite common to have patterns where the LTI part to the LTI tool is really SSO only and not kind of a more robust grade and roster integration. But sometimes, it's the kind of common LMS centric pattern where the app is not just single sign-on, it's also working with the LMS's roster and the LMS's gradebook in that context, and the LMS translate that or converts that to the SIS as needed. So these are two kind of common patterns here. So that's, I think, really helpful when trying to understand the differences between how SIS systems work and LTI names and roles work. So I think I might have missed a couple points here. So when you first ask the question, why isn't this just one roster, something like that? I think the main question tools need to ask themselves is, do I really need all those users? Do I really need to know about every single one? And I think almost, most of the time the answer is no. You don't need to know every single user. You don't need to know every single detail. You're here to do a job, to let them read a book or take a test or do a thing. You don't have to know all the things all the time.
And I was just going to say, the other aspect of that is looking from the platform's point of view. It might be, do I want to tell this tool about all of my users? In the case of LTI, they can limit which users they're going to know about. If it's just installed on a single course or something like that, they may not want to give away all of their students' information to a tool that they're only using in one particular course.
And not just the platform, like the customer, an individual institution might decide to not send that to a given tool.
Yeah.
To that point, the ideal, again, for a tool is to be able to function with no user details other than like the LTI user ID. In practice, most tools want some of the other data. They like to have a name to display to the user, things like that. Bad practice is to require all the data all the time for all the things. Now, there are obviously use cases where you need a lot more of the data because you're, maybe you're building a grade book, you're doing all kinds of stuff, doesn't mean those use cases don't exist. Just saying the majority of tools should try to work off a minimal set of data, and that is healthy data security and privacy practices. Though if you do need, like I have note down here, access to much more stuff, you might need to do an SAS integration on top of or next to or instead of names and roles, because again, they're kind of solving some different problems there. Oh yeah, and so a lot of tools have to solve both of these use cases. There are tools that are just going to have to use names and roles and use one roster because they integrate into environments or contexts, with a single sign-on portal versus a more centric LMS in the center kind of pattern. So, there's definitely some frustrations or, future pains for us to ease as a one EdTech community around that. But sometimes as a tool, you do just have to implement both because you're working in kind of two different common contexts. I think that's it about the SIS side of it. Any other thoughts or comments about names and roles versus SIS integrations and privacy stuff from anybody? Cool. So now I'm going to quickly go through the course groups, and then we'll move on to Martin to do some demos, and he'll kind of show examples and fill in some of the gaps I had on this. So course groups, I'm just going to kind of go through the technical details of this. This is one of my favorite specifications, even though I don't talk about it all the time, because this is a great example of two IMS members who just had an integration problem and utilized the infrastructure, the framework of LTI to solve that problem in a standardized way. So this was just Blackboard and turn in and say, hey, we've got a bunch of groups in our course and we want to be able to use those groups in an LTI tool. And so I'll explain how that works. This asterisk is that this is published in a member draft version. We have 6 or 7 pending changes to publish there. So the published spec is slightly out of date. So sorry about that. We're working on that. So the course group service defines I think of it as two things. It defines groups and group sets, right? That's what it is. Okay. So you can define a bunch of groups, and then you can define sets of groups. So I'll get to those two things. But this is what the launch claim looks like. So again, it looks like all of the other LTI launch claims. It includes the scope, like almost all the other ones. So this is your scope for reading this. And then here's the two URLs you use, the groups URL and the group sets URL. And so the groups returns a group container, and the groups just look like this. They've got IDs and names, and then a tag if you want to group them. There's no specific vocabulary meaning behind the tags, and tools probably generally won't know what those mean. So you can use them for grouping things as useful. And then if a group is in a group set, all the sets it's in will also be listed as set IDs, but there's also an endpoint to get the group sets. And so a group set is just an ID and a name and a tag. I don't know why that has a course.
Yeah, so the course section one is just because although the tags are opaque to the specification sense, there's nothing stopping you from using those tags and having some kind of shared vocabulary between them. So in this case, you could set a tag to basically say this group set contains section information. So each group in this is a course section, and if between the tool and the platform you both want to kind of understand that data and react to it and do something with it, then you can do. We didn't want to specify everything up front and say, this is every single thing that you can put in tag and every type of group that you can have, because the list would continuously grow and we would never get everything there up front. So yeah, this is a little bit more of a flexible way of doing it.
Cool. So as a tool, you get an LTI launch, you can get all the users in the course and that context, and then you can find out what groups exist and what group sets exist. You know, a lot of use cases won't need, you know, groups. A lot of use cases won't need the various details in here. But the last thing you need to tie this in, it's nice to know about the groups and group sets, but how do you know what users are in those groups? That's probably the main thing a tool will care about. So it's probably common to just define the groups and then the users in there. And so there's kind of two ways to understand what members are in those groups. One is on the groups, you can specify a user ID when you make the group service call, and that will return just the groups that the specified user is in. And so you have to, you know, watch the ID, and the user ID field on this container indicates that these groups are the ones that user is in. So that's one way. You can just say, give me all the groups this specific user is in. But also on the membership service of names and roles, you can add a groups equals true to that. And Martin, others, make sure I'm getting this right. You just add groups equals true. Yes. And what that tells membership is to add a group enrollments attribute to the membership record right next to all the other things. And all it is a bunch of group IDs. It's a bunch of group objects. And it looks like we normally would just put the group ID in there. So to find out what users are, you can ask for a specific user, or on your membership records, ask that groups be included there. And so as a platform implementing groups, not only are you implementing these two endpoints, you should also enhance your membership service to understand that groups are part of this as well. So an implementation of group course groups is those two endpoints and an enhancement to the membership service itself. I think that's for the groups. Did I miss anything interesting on the group stuff, Martin?
No, I think that's about everything.
Cool. So that's it for my longer than expected dive into names and roles in the group service. We're going to have Martin demo some of this for us to show it in practice, and then we should have time for questions, or if anyone else has a demo as well, would be happy to accommodate that. So you good to go, Martin?
I am. Okay. Shit. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Right. So I'm going to demo this in Blackboard. This is just the integration, the LTI integration between Blackboard and Turnitin. So we can see here I'm in my instance of Blackboard. I've set up a LTI Names and Roles 101 course, and it's got a Turnitin assignment that I've already created in here to learn about names and roles in LTI. So when I select this, actually before we do that, I'll just show you the setup of this this course. So in here, if I look at the roster, so I've got myself as an instructor and then a bunch of students on here, and then in Blackboard, you can also set up course groups, as you can see down here. So when I select the groups, you can see I've got a group set called marking groups. And if I go inside that group set, you'll see that the students who are on this course have been split out between two different marking groups. So when I launch into the Turnitin LTI inbox, what you'll see is we will list all of the students. So there's all 6 students. So what we've done there is we've called back up to Blackboard to fetch those students and added them to our roster. It's worth noting this wasn't really discussed in the presentation, just about access patterns of best practices of how you would want to sync memberships and when you would want to do it. So in our case here, we will sync the memberships on access. So doing that means that because we're having to sync a single course at a time, doing it on access means that if you have a whole bunch of courses and over the years you've got all of these legacy courses that are a few years old and nothing's really changing on them, the tool doesn't need to be syncing the memberships for those every hour to make sure that they're in sync. So you're better off updating these when a user accesses or a user interacts with the course. So what we do here is we actually we will sync once an hour. So if you launch in multiple times within the same hour, we don't bother syncing every time, just to kind of save on sending lots of requests up to the platform. There is an option to manually refresh the inbox, and that will force a call up to Blackboard to pull the members in again. So you can see here that, again, one of the advantages of having the memberships is I could submit on behalf of a user. So even though this user has never accessed this assignment, I know that they're here, so I can upload on behalf of them and grade and get all of that information back into the gradebook in Blackboard. I've already submitted on behalf of a user here. So you can see that they've made a submission, which happens to be the names and roles specification, which also has been very heavily plagiarized. So we can give them a score of 10. So now that we've kind of shown that, the other thing to look at is the group service. So our implementation of the group service, groups are kind of ad hoc groups here. So there is no explicit purpose to these groups. It's not saying that, this is the only thing these groups can be used for. What the tool is being told is, hey, these users have some kind of association with each other, and it's up to the tool to kind of make use of that however they want. This could be used when you're setting up the assignment as an easy way of grouping students together to do a group submission or something like that. Or in our case, we're doing filtering. So as the instructor here, I can see the group set that was set up of marking groups. So I can select my marking group here, and you can see that I've got Matt, or I could select Bob's, and it shows the other users that were in that group. So there's a lot of other ways that groups could be used. This was our particular use case that we were trying to solve. So we wanted to do it with marking groups, but yeah, they could be used for anything else. And that's pretty much it for the memberships on there. Does anybody have any questions?
This can be questions on the demo or in general about names and roles. I have a couple queued up if no one speaks up, but
oh, I did get sent a question directly.
Oh, and I didn't keep up on the chat. I think others were, so I might have missed it.
So the question was around how you obtain the memberships endpoint and whether you can get it during deep linking. So yes, to both of those. So you obtain the memberships endpoint during the launch. So when you either launch into a resource, or in this case, if we wanted to do a deep linking launch, so I could select here. We can see the launch. So this is a deep linking launch, and we will find the launch. Okay, so this is the payload that we get given, and if we look in that jwt.io, right. So we can see this is the names and roles claim here, and we've been given that memberships URL. So we have that during deep linking. So when you're either selecting content or creating new content through deep linking, you have access to the list of students. So if you wanted to, create an assignment through deep linking and select the groups that you were going to use, or have information about the students that are on that course displayed during that process, you could do
that. Chuck's question's a good one that comes up too. He says, do LMSs allow the use of NERPs before any tool has been placed in a site? If so, what is stopping tool from guessing site IDs and spidering all the rosters of a course? And so the names and roles itself just says, hey, you should only get the context URLs what you're getting. It doesn't say what a platform should or would do if someone started guessing and crawling across those. So it is kind of, it's a good question for the LMS folks here or the platform folks here. But I think a lot of platforms have a way to check whether a tool is employed in a given context and could reject those guessing URLs because they would recognize that a tool was never intended to have access to that context. But again, that's kind of platform specific. So if there's any other thoughts from the LMS folks on that question or that topic area, I think Victor's answering in chat, but feel free to speak up.
Yeah, I was just say, as a general rule, yes, that is the case, that if you don't have the tool kind of deployed within a particular context, then you wouldn't give access to names and roles.
Yeah, in practice, there's probably a lot of platforms, if a tool was changing that, they might end up having that access because they haven't set that up. But the best practice for tools is to not do that and to only ever use the ones that were given to you in launch claims, because platforms will and can and should block some of those spidering attempts depending on the situation. So a tool shouldn't rely on that feature for sure.
Avoid using numeric IDs. Is one way of getting around that. So what I would say is that it does get a little bit complicated, to police from a platform's point of view, just because if you take the deep linking example, if I've never added anything to that course yet, but I do my first deep linking launch, can that deep linking launch have access to the roster, right? There's no resources on the course yet that link to my tool, but I've just been launched through deep linking. So kind of how you manage that is entirely up to the platform. But yes, it's something worth considering. And from a tools point of view, don't attempt to guess things because URLs are opaque and may change at any time. So you can't guarantee that the hack that you have in place to guess the next course ID is going to work tomorrow.
Any other questions on Martin's demos or names and roles? Did we miss anything in chat? Seems like most of the chat ones got answered already.
I think we got everything.
Cool. Well, it looks like Josh popped on to wrap up too, but thanks everyone. The next roundtable will be whenever Josh says it is. He already said, and I forgot. If you don't know the topic yet, but we're through this series of the main specs, so it'll be a next thing. But thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, everybody. And yeah, the next as I mentioned earlier, there will not be a roundtable in August. The next one will be September. The most likely date is September 27th. We typically do these the final Tuesday in the month. And as Bracken also noted, we're not sure what the topic on that one will be yet, but we'll do an outreach to the members when it's all set up. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.